Hi, I'm Amanda.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Shivani.
For our project, we created a card game adapted from a game called Blitz. In our version of Blitz, there are two players who each have one turn per round. So during their turn, they can either discard a card or draw a new one or knock. When a player knocks, their hand stays as is, and then after players either swap cards or knock, it is the other player's turn.
The goal of our game is to have your hand be the closest to the target number, which is randomly generated from a range of 6 through 33. The values of the cards 2 to 10 are based on their face value, and aces are 11 points, kings, queens, and jacks are 10 points.
At the end of each round, the program will calculate who is closest to the target value. There are several possible outcomes. If both players knock, the person who is closer in value gains a point straight from the other player. If only one player knocks and the other swaps, the player with the closest value gains 1 point. If both players swap, the player with the closest value gains a point. Note, you cannot knock and pick up a new card in a single round. It is one or the other. If there's a tie, no points are distributed and a new round is played. Once a player reaches 5 points, the game ends and a winner is crowned.
Okay, if player 1 knocks, then we go to player 2's turn, and they have the choice of either knocking as well or swapping. So if player 2 chooses to swap as well, then the player with the value closer to the target value gains a point, but the player with the value farther away loses a point. If player 1 chooses to knock, and then we go to player 2 and they choose to swap, then the player with the value closer to the target value gains a point and nobody loses a point. If player 1 swaps, then you go to player 2 and they once again have the choice to knock or swap. So if they knock, the player with the value closer to the target value gains a point, and if they swap, the player with the value closer also gains a point.
One of my main responsibilities for this project was creating a structure to summon a random card, and in our game we combined 2 decks of 52 cards for 104 cards total, and so this structure is incorporated into our function so that we can draw a random card when needed. And one example of where the card is randomly drawn is in these swap buttons, which I also helped create, and when these swap buttons are pressed, in the axes corresponding to it, a random card is displayed. And we created this structure of cards by organizing it by suit and by the point value associated with it. And then I just combined those arrays into one large one for our image array, essentially, and our point array. And I also created a class definition that we use to help declare who wins the game at the end by comparing which player points were greater.
Okay. One of my main responsibilities for the reach portion was to create the sound effects. So when the cards are swapped, there's a sound effect, as well as when the player clicks the button knock, there's a knocking sound effect for that. I also worked on what would happen if the players clicked that they wanted to knock. So what would happen is a table value would be increased by 1, and if both of the players chose to knock, then there was a switch case for that, and what would happen is one player would gain a point and one player would lose a point. There was also a switch case for if one player chooses to knock and another doesn't, then one player will gain a point and the other player will neither lose nor gain a point. I also worked on the player points. So I worked on creating the equations where one player would either gain a point or lose a point. And I worked on the variables for that.
So my job and responsibility in doing this code, so first as a reach feature, I designed card designs for our deck, and then as well I displayed the rules and created like a rules instructions page. My job was to display the players' points as a string of characters. I also displayed the images of the cards as they were being played, and as well as like the covers to keep players' turns hidden from the others. And
another feature I worked on for our project was a button that we just called Go that helped transition between one player's knock or swap into the other's turn. And for this button and for all the other ones that I helped create, I also had to make sure I enabled them and disabled them at the right time.
And then in order for the game to loop to a new round, we had to insert a player turn is equal to the opposite player. So player turn equals 1 was correlated to player 1, and then player turn equals to 2 was correlated to player 2. And so because of that, it looped after every round, and after every round points were counted, and after a certain amount of points were reached, then the game is over.